Imagine the countdown doesn't stop at 33. Imagine Expedition 33 fails. Then 32 fails, and 31, and every year the world doesn't just lose people. It loses experience, it loses memory, it loses stability. By the time you reach Expedition 25, the best engineers are gone, the veteran explorers are gone, the people who remember how the early missions worked are gone. Now push it further. Expedition 20, Expedition 17, that is where the thought experiment gets terrifying. There is a simple but devastating question. What would be the last age truly capable of exploring competently? And what happens when that number drops into the teens? Because once you cross the threshold, you are not sending adults anymore. You're sending kids. And not in the romanticized choose one RPG way. In the desperate civilization is dying way. That changes everything. Society in Expedition 33 is already fragile. There are fewer volunteers each year. Even the festival of Gommage draws less enthusiasm over time. Hope is thinning. Now imagine the countdown hits 19. The oldest living citizens are barely out of high school. Who's running the guild? Who's managing supply chains? Who is deciding strategy? Teenagers can be brilliant. They can be brave, they can be innovative. But they are still developing emotionally, neurologically, socially. Without adults to stabilize institutions, what happens to the authority? Protocols start slipping, discipline erodes. Hierarchy becomes harder to maintain. And here is the darker lore: teenagers don't just lack experience, they lack generational memory. They didn't see Expedition 33 launch, they don't remember the original optimism, they inherit only failure. So instead of "we can fix this," the culture becomes "nothing works anyway." That is not just a military problem, that is society decay. Some Expedition 33 fans speculate that maybe the guild would adapt, maybe kids would be trained from birth, prepared like Luna, disciplined, mission-focused, hardened early. On paper that sounds plausible, but in practice, you're asking children to internalize the inevitability of death before they finished adolescence. And adolescence is already chaotic. Hormones, identity crisis, emotional volatility. Now mix that with "you will likely die on your 18th birthday." That doesn't create stable explorers, it creates extremes. Some will become hyper-disciplined, almost mechanical. Others will spiral into recklessness. You'd see the missions fractured by immaturity, impulsiveness. And without older mentors, there is no emotional anchor. The expedition teams would start resembling survival camps more than coordinated units. And the scariest part, they won't even realize what they are missing, because they never experienced a world led by adults. It may feel devastating to force the responsibility of saving humanity onto teenagers. But that is not just dark, it's existential. Teenagers are in the process of becoming someone. Now imagine your entire identity is shaped around being the last hope of Lumiere. There's no time for self-discovery, no long-term dreams, no "what do I want to be?" You're an expedition, you're a number, you're a deadline. There is where the tone of the game's dark humor becomes prophetic. Some are joked about being gommaged at 33 in real life. But if the age drops to 18, it stops being gallows humor, it becomes childhood erased. And here is another terrifying angle. Teenagers are far more influenced by peer culture. So what if expedition culture mutates? What if bravery becomes performative? What if risk-taking becomes social currency? What if someone live streams their own heroic for validation? Without adult oversight, heroism and recklessness blur, and civilization becomes spectacle. Let's go even deeper. What happens to reproduction rates? Family structures, romantic bonds, if 17-year-olds know they won't see 18? Why invest emotionally? Why build attachment? Why plan for children? There is a speculative version that recruitment was already declining and public faith in expeditions was fading in clair-obscur universe. Now imagine trying to convince a generation of teenagers to willingly sacrifice themselves for systems that hasn't worked for decades. Rebellion becomes rational. Underground movements emerge. Why should we go? Why should we obey? And here is the turning point. If even one expedition refuses, the countdown becomes meaningless. Authority collapses. The guild fractures. Civil war becomes more likely than exploration. At this point, the threat isn't just a curse, it's human nature. There are jokes about Expedition Zero throughout the community, but what would that mean? If the countdown reaches 0, it implies there is no left eligible, no one old enough, no one qualified. The world becomes children raising children, or worse, no one left to organize it all. The tragedy of Expedition 33 isn't just about the curse, it's the slow erosion of adulthood, of wisdom, of continuity. The game hints at societal fatigue even at 33. Imagine that fatigue magnified across a decade of decline. By the time the expeditions reach teenagers, society won't look like Lumiere anymore. It would look like a civilization in hospice, still breathing but barely. The reason this idea hits so hard is because Expedition 33 already makes players uncomfortable about aging. People are joking about 32 and feeling targeted. But beneath the humor, there is a fear. What happens when time runs out? Lowering the expedition age into the teens forces us to confront something darker. Not just morality, but the collapse of generational succession. Every society depends on overlap. Adults guide youth. Youth replace adults. Memory transfers. If the chain breaks, humanity doesn't just die, it forges itself first. And maybe that is the most distinguished possibility of all. Not that expedition fails, but that by the time the younger stars end, there's nothing left worth saving. Thanks for watching, hit that like button, subscribe for more expedition lore and guides videos, and be strong to your own journey to the paintress.